The Ruy Lopez is one of the most popular openings played at any level of chess, including the highest level there is, and it carries a lot of very cool lines and a lot of nice traps. And in the video today, we are going to explore some of these really awesome traps that exist for both sides. As we get into the first trap, I want to make it clear that you shouldn't only intend to memorize the specific lines, but I think it's more important to internalize the properties of the position that allow the trap to function, because with that knowledge in mind, you'll be able to really apply these trapping ideas to all sorts of different positions in the Ruy Lopez and perhaps in other similar openings. With that in mind, let's begin with the first trap, and it begins after e4, e5, knight to f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5. Now after here, there's a number of ideas for black. a6 is among the most common, bishop to a4, and now b5. And after bishop to b3, black can continue in a number of ways, and some of the moves that black will play here are not necessarily the best, but the trap is actually very good because it introduces this idea of taking advantage of the newly weakened diagonal here from d5 to a8. And so if black continues with a5, let's say, you play a4, trying to not let black get so much space, and after b4, locking up the position, you strike in the center, d4. Now, here bishop to d6, which is the losing move. It has been played in real over-the-board games quite a lot. The idea is d6 is just very passive. And so black tries to develop both pieces, also understanding that they don't need to move the d-pawn because the bishop might develop to b7. So they don't need to move the d-pawn necessarily early. But after bishop d6, this is losing because of takes, 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 and queen to d5. And again, the idea is not only is this diagonal super strong, but there's this incredible weakness along this diagonal here that even if it's not necessarily in this specific move order, there's going to be chances if you strike with d4 to take advantage of that weakness. So look forward for that in your games as white. Moving on to trap number 2, we have actually the black side here, and black can play this very common trap, and you start by playing knight to f6 after the Ruy Lopez opening, and after the move d3, which is, a very obvious move to play. White has a number of options, but d3 is certainly solid. You're connecting your pawns, and your idea is to castle, and of course the bishop is already out of the pawn chain, so it makes a lot of sense. And here you continue with the move knight to e7. It looks very weird, but the idea is that it invites the move knight to e5. And after the pawn is accepted, white can find themselves in a lot of trouble, starting by playing the move c6. And I made a full video over this, so there's a number of options here. There's the move knight to c4, and you have to be kind of careful of checkmate as well. So there's a couple of things to be aware of. So if you're interested in a more in-depth analysis, then check out that video. But just to give you the idea of what's going on here, let's say bishop to a4, and then queen to a5 check. And the idea with d3 is that it weakens the diagonal here, and you might even have your pick of which minor piece to capture. So some very, very nice trapping ideas here. And again, check this more in depth after this video. I'll link it in the description. Let's proceed. Here's another trap with the black pieces. It begins, of course, in the Ruy Lopez, and here you play a6, bishop drops to a4, and now d6. After the move d4 exploding in the center, you can continue with b5, bishop moves, knight takes, pawn takes, and queen takes. And there's a couple of things to be aware of here. Black is actually winning. But it's a very tricky idea that you have to employ. You begin with the move c5. And the idea is if the queen moves somewhere random, then c4 is trapping the bishop, right? c5 is a way to get this pawn here with tempo. But it's very tricky after the move queen to d5. It seems like you're actually losing. The rook is attacked, checkmate is attacked. It seems like all hope is gone. But you can play the move bishop e6, defending the rook, defending checkmate, and if the queen simply moves away passively, then c4 hits, and you win the bishop. But queen to c6 comes, and you can move back to d7. Now it might seem like they can just repeat, right? But the difference is this. in this position before, they were also hitting the rook, so you had to move away your bishop to achieve two things. But now they're only threatening checkmate, and you can achieve stopping that by simply playing c4. And you end up a piece up in such an early stage, it's totally crushing. And so white definitely can use these diagonals, but you must be careful on both sides because these diagonals and these tricks exist for both black and white. So you have to proceed very cautiously. Let's continue. This is one of my favorite traps on the list because it's very beautiful. You sacrifice a piece, and in exchange you get this uninevitable mate. It's super beautiful. Let's see it in action. So we find ourselves in the Ruy Lopez with a6, and here they take, which is a totally legitimate line. You take back, and then they quickly castle. You continue with bishop to g4, pinning the knight, and after h3, you might recognize this sort of idea. You play h5, and you give away your bishop. But if they are so daring as to take, then you take back. And if they move their knight away, I mean, their best move is not, first of all, their best move is not even to take your free bishop and just leave the tension, but if they do, their best move here is not to take to move away the knight, because if they do, let's say, I mean, they can move to e1, but if they're looking to be even more ambitious, let's say they take on e5, you continue with queen to h4. And you've opened up your rook, and with the help of the queen, it's going to be checkmate. You might think you're very creative and find f3, trying to give the king some escape, but then g3, a very nice way to just box the king in. It's going to be checkmate. Let's look at another beautiful trap for white side this time, and it begins in the Ruy Lopez with a6, bishop to a4, and now knight to f6. And after castles, black plays knight to e4. Now this is of course a position that has been analyzed so much with engines and without, can white really afford to give away this pawn? And the idea and the answer, as you might see here, is yes, because white is going to get so much play along these files here, and white will be able to punish black. So starting with d4, trying to open up the position because the king for black is in the center. Let's say black kicks away the bishop to b3, and then plays d5, trying to lock up the center and specifically this bishop. Also defending the knight, which in some cases, like this one, will be under attack. Here, pawn takes, and now bishop to e6. Again, black is trying to play as solidly as possible, just making sure nothing is hanging and everything is okay, and later trying to castle. So c3, bishop to e7, looking to castle, and now rook to e1. And after black does castle, suddenly knight to d4 comes. And, okay, I mean, black can take here, but if they end up taking, white's going to get a solid center. And so very often black will simply defend the knight, right? Something like this. But here comes a beautiful idea, and a very surprising and unexpected one, because again, look at all these pieces. Black seems extra safe. But after knight takes bishop, it's actually the case where black is losing a piece, because if they take with the pawn, first of all, then rook takes e4. The queen is pinned, right? The queen is undefended here, and they can no longer take back the rook. And in a very funny manner, if they take with the queen, then rook takes e4 again, and the queen is pinned, this time from a different angle, from the bishop here. And again, they cannot take the rook. And so a really fun idea that just exploits the idea of a pin to an extreme. And I guess I should add, because you might be wondering, what if they end up taking the seemingly free pawn on e5? Well, then we get into this very funny position where this is going to be okay for black, but you start with f3. If the knight moves, then notice that you take the knight behind it. So they have to play bishop h4, and then g3. Now there's so many pieces attacked. And after they play c5, you take, they take, you take, and they drop their bishop back. You're up a piece, so it seems like you should be totally crushing. The truth is, black has a lot of play along this open file, and if they play very precisely, they can equalize, but they have to prove it, and I think a lot of people would prefer white here anyways. So we get to this very fun position. Alright, let's continue. For the final trap, I want to go ahead and show you a tactical idea that you don't really associate with the Ruy Lopez, but there are some cases where it can happen. So let's look at it. So e4, e5, the knight develops, of course, we get to the Ruy Lopez with a6. We continue here with bishop to c5. They castle, we develop our knight, and now c3, a typical idea, and we drop our bishop back to safety. So rook to e1, solid idea, and now immediately we attack with knight to g4. Now it might make sense, especially because white typically prepares the pawn breakthrough d4 to just play d4 here immediately, right? And of course, they have a lot of defenders here. So after knight takes, it seems like white's totally fine here. But now the queen infiltrates, and it's already becoming quite tricky to play this. There's some immediate threats. Now here, in this position, white, the best choice for white is actually to deal with the tension along this diagonal and let white take here on h2, and let black take, sorry, on h2. But it seems very hard and tough for white to allow black to just infiltrate like this. And so very often they're going to try something like knight to f3. But then comes the move queen takes f2, and just to finish it off here, queen to g1. A smothered mate appears on the board on f2. Super beautiful idea. And if they try something else like h3, you can continue with knight takes f2, and this is just very fun position for black to play in general. Something like queen to d2, and now the knight can come to d3. Notice the queen cannot take because this rook falls, and you're separating the knight and the queen. This is just really fun to play here. Rook to e3, bishop takes. I mean, this position is totally lost. You can even use it, the pin here, and infiltrate with your queen, give a check, and it's basically time to resign here as white. So some very nice traps from both sides, introducing some nice ideas that you can try to employ in your Ruy Lopez games. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you next time. Peace out.